What is the absolute worst game you ever played? Maybe you thought of a game that was disappointing, or maybe you thought of a game that is filled with bugs and glitches. Although a few games I personally don't really like came to mind, I decided to find the definitive answer. I found a list of the top 100 lowest rated games on Steam, and I'm gonna play them all to find out which game I personally think is the worst. Now let's spin the wheel and get ready to go dumpster diving. Despair? Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Let's dive in. Despair markets itself as an indie horror video game, which, let's be honest, is a bit of a red flag. Indie horror games usually fall into two camps. On one side, you have the psychological horror icons, games that dive deep into taboo topics like murder, self-harm, or cannibalism. These games dig into the darkest parts of the human psyche, blending reality and nightmare until you're left questioning your sanity long after you've turned off the screen. Then there's the other side, which I call the FNAF rejects. These are the low-effort cash grab horror games full of padding, ridiculously dark levels, buggy gameplay, a forgettable mascot, endless quote-unquote jump scares, and just enough vague lore to tease a sequel if it ever gets made. These kinds of games always left a sour taste in my mouth. First off, I hate jump scares. Aside from the obvious fact that I'm a little scaredy cat, I also feel like most jump scares are just cheap attempts at getting the player to react to your game. Sure, there are a few memorable ones, but it feels like some indie developers attempt to substitute legitimate horror for a crappy JPEG and a sudden loud sound effect. Let me be perfectly clear, I know how difficult it is to make a video game. I always try to overlook the flaws in an indie game if I can tell that the developers have a unique idea and a passion to make that idea come to life. But for years I avoided every horror game because I assumed that they're all just soulless trend chasers. And while now I'm able to enjoy a good psychological horror game, that doesn't mean that the FNAF rejects just suddenly disappeared. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Despair. Despair kicks off with this woman playing peekaboo on a train while the credits roll awkwardly in the bottom left-hand corner. Despite there only being one person in the credits, it takes 30 seconds before you can do anything. Then boom, you press a button, the train crashes, and the woman explodes. I went to the settings, and I was surprised to see more than two options. That surprise didn't last long though, since the second I changed the setting, my mouse turned invisible. Once I finally finished playing the worst game of Where's Waldo ever, I had to sit through another loading screen before I woke up on a derailed train. After waiting another 40 seconds, I finally gained control of the main character. I walked off the train, and since the game doesn't say anything, I decided to just wander through the tunnel until I found something. Aside from the lights going out, literally nothing else happened as I walked around in the pitch dark for minutes like an idiot. I ended up restarting the game just in case something broke, meaning I had to sit through those loading screens all over again. I walked down the railroad tracks a second time until the lights went out, but this time I was hit by a train. Except that didn't actually happen, I guess, and instead I walked into the side door to find a flashlight and a few cryptic notes of random, purposely vague lore. I walked further down this little hallway until I encountered a locked door and a vent. Now your first instinct might be that you have to find a key to unlock the door, and you'd be right in almost any other game. But in Despair, there are no keys, so that big red lock on the door? Worthless. Instead, you have to do the rational thing here and climb through a vent, obviously. Speaking of things that don't make sense, let's talk about the environment. I'm not going to judge a $1 game made by a single developer for having rather low quality textures, but if you're trying to go for atmospheric horror, at least make the atmosphere coherent. What is that supposed to be on the wall? Why are there random pillars in a room with 3 boxes in the corner? Why is there a random bed next to a giant hole in the wall that leads to another room below it? All these rooms that I talked about are back to back to back. What exactly am I supposed to be exploring here? Am I supposed to be scared of something yet? Is there some kind of hidden lore that I don't understand? Help me, game theory, I'm scared. I hop into another couple events and stumble around until I find the right way to go. Since there's no way of knowing where you are and are not supposed to be, you just have to keep trying different directions until you find another room you can explore. And between the confusing level design and the fact that you walk extremely slowly, there's another issue here. Your battery doesn't last that long. Normally this wouldn't be an issue, however there are barely any batteries in the map, and the flashlight randomly decides to turn itself on at the worst times. With light being vital to getting through a few mazes later on in the game, you have to walk around in the dark so you can save your battery for when you truly need it. Then, when you add in random hallways leading to nothing, it feels like the developers were trying to pad out the experience a bit so you wouldn't instantly finish the game. Even when the flashlight is working correctly, you can still easily miss a lot of the quote-unquote jump scares here. For example, after you exit one of the vents, you have to walk through this weird bathroom area. Right when you're about to leave, all the doors start slamming open and shut. However, you can't see this unless you decide to leave the bathroom backwards, since the trigger for this scare is in a weird area. This isn't an isolated issue either. The exact same thing happens with this weird dolly, but then later on you see a box that falls the moment you walk past it. There's also some parts that seem like they're supposed to be scary, but they just aren't. Like at one point you come across an exit sign, and instead of a door, you just find a single noose on a pipe. This isn't scary, this is something a 7-year-old sends you when you kill him in Call of Duty. The rest of the game is a blur of nonsensical mazes, awkwardly swimming like an overweight seal, and a strobe light section featuring the worst ASMR imaginable. I stumbled around a bit longer until I found a door and entered a loading screen that made it seem like the game was finally over. Nope. Now we are in this random, I don't know, mental ward or something? As you walk upstairs, you find a ton of
sweet, succulent AA batteries
and see a shadow that doesn't disappear until you walk up and give it a hug. Then you have to keep going upstairs and try to open this locked door. You then have to go back downstairs so a ghost girl can appear to unlock the door for you so you can go back upstairs and into a new area. Here we get to move a shelf and somehow walk across water before we get locked into a cutscene. Apparently the ghost girl who unlocked the door for us 30 seconds ago now decided that she wants to kill us. Anyway, after falling on our face 2 steps into our escape, we are then thrust into a QuickTime event where we have to throw things at a ghost. Now, I can already hear the comments. Cheeto, why is there a blue bar at the bottom of your screen? Well, this footage isn't mine. It's actually from this guy that I found online. In my game, my flashlight died as soon as the chase started, and I can't change my batteries no matter how much the game wants me to. So instead of a climatic action sequence, I instead got this. After stumbling around in the dark again, the game finally decides to reward me for my hard work and determination by immediately flashbanging me. Then the game teleports us to a train station, we board the most beat up train I ever saw in my life, the ghost girl shows up to stare at us again, and that's it. The game ends with a to be continued before telling us to quit. If we ignore the time spent in loading screens and the time spent wandering in the dark, it took me less than 10 minutes to beat Despair. I tried looking up more information about the developer Assets Games Company, and I found a link to a YouTube channel with a few videos. Most of these videos were for Despair, but there was one for a different game called Backside. To be honest, I have no idea what's going on in the trailer, and the Steam link in the description leads to a dead end. When diving into these dumpster diving games, I always try to point out the good as much as I can because, believe it or not, I want these video games to be good. But Despair is a game that you can complete in 10 minutes, even with the dark and confusing level design. I stumbled upon glitches, barely readable lore scattered all around the map, and a bunch of lazy quote-unquote jump scares. And how does it end? With a to be continued that was never continued. Despair checks all the boxes of a FNAF reject game minus the mascot, probably because the ghost girl was too scared to actually show up until the end of the game. If this was a school project or a game jam submission, then I could forgive the lack of polish here. But since I couldn't find any information on the developers, I'm left to assume that Despair was a soulless cash grab meant to leech time and money away from genuinely amazing indie horror games. Despair is easily the worst game I played so far, and not in the fun way. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, peace out.